The reel arrived wrapped in brown paper, its corners softened by time, its surface carrying the faint scent of camphor and damp cellars. It had been sealed inside a rusted tin canister that someone, decades ago, had labeled with a shaky blue pencil. Only 3 words remained legible after so many years and so many hands. Stuttgart Station, 1941. The rest of the inscription had dissolved into smudges, as if the war itself had tried to erase whatever truth the reel contained. When the archivist first placed it onto the wooden table, the dim yellow lamp above flickered twice, and for a fleeting moment the room seemed suspended between 2 centuries, as though the reel had brought a shadow of the past with it. The walls exhaled a coldness that did not belong to the present. The archivist had handled hundreds of artifacts from the Second World War, yet something about this reel felt unnervingly alive, as if a pulse throbbed beneath the metal casing. He noticed it immediately. His fingers trembled slightly as he pried open the lid, revealing the tightly coiled strip inside. The film was surprisingly well preserved for something that should have deteriorated long ago. There were no mold stains, no smells of vinegar rot that typically plagued old celluloid. It was intact, almost stubbornly so, and that in itself felt like a warning. Still, curiosity always outweighed caution, especially when dealing with materials dated from the early years of the war. Every artifact from that era could hold a piece of a forgotten truth. He threaded the film through the projector, listening to the dry whisper of the celluloid sliding between metal gears. The bulb buzzed awake. A circle of pale light spread across the cracked plaster wall, swallowing the darkness around it. The moment the reel began to spin, an oppressive cold thickened the air, as though something unseen had just stepped into the room. The archivist straightened his back, his eyes narrowing. He was alone in the building, or he was supposed to be. The footage opened with the platform of Stuttgart Central Station on a gray morning in early 1941. Smoke poured from the engines of departing trains, drifting upward like wounded ghosts trying to escape the ground. Faces passed by the camera in hurried blurs, most belonging to evacuees or families clinging to fragile hope in the midst of a continent tearing itself apart. The camera operator, whoever he had been, kept his lens steady, almost too steady, documenting the chaos with a calmness that didn't match the mania around him. It felt clinical, predatory even, as if he were waiting for something specific to emerge from the crowd. And then the boy appeared. He couldn't have been more than 9 or 10 years old, wearing a dark wool coat buttoned all the way to the throat. His hair was neatly combed, and he carried a small cloth satchel slung diagonally across his chest. At first he looked like any other evacuee preparing for relocation. Yet there was something strange about the way he moved, something slow and deliberate, as though he were drifting slightly out of sync with the rest of the station. People brushed past him without so much as a glance. But he remained uncannily still, his gaze fixed on something outside the frame. His eyes were deep, solemn, far too old for a child. Midway through the footage, the boy suddenly stopped walking. His head snapped toward the camera with unnerving precision. The archivist felt his breath hitch as the boy's face became perfectly centered in the frame, as though he had always known he was being filmed. The child's expression didn't carry fear or curiosity. Instead, it held an unsettling blankness, a quiet that didn't belong in a place filled with departures and goodbyes. It felt like he was staring through the camera, through the decades, right into the present. If you're watching this, tell me, where are you watching from right now? The boy's lips parted. He whispered something barely visible, an impossible detail given the technology of the era. Silent films rarely captured spoken intent, but here the movement of his mouth was eerily precise. The archivist leaned closer, trying to read the shape of the word, but the frame flickered violently, as if the film itself rejected the attempt. When it stabilized, the boy was gone, not walked away, not moved behind a pillar, gone, vanished from one frame to the next. The crowd around him didn't react. They kept walking, boarding trains, embracing their loved ones. No one looked confused or alarmed. It was as though the boy had never existed. The archivist rewound the reel and played it again, and again, and again. Each time, the same sequence occurred. The boy appeared, stared into the lens, mouthed that impossible word, and then disappeared entirely between frames, 26 and 27. The cut was too clean, too abrupt to be accidental, yet too seamless to have been edited. This was raw footage, a true document of something that should not be possible. The room grew colder with every viewing. The projector's light dimmed, flickered, fought against invisible pressure. Shadows clung to the corners, stretching longer with every pass of the reel. The archivist could no longer shake the feeling that something was standing just behind him, watching over his shoulder, waiting for the moment he stopped the film. He resisted the urge to turn around. A strange distortion appeared during the fifth viewing, a brief flutter on the left side of the frame. It looked like a figure, tall and thin, shrouded in what could have been smoke or cloth. But when he replayed that section, the figure vanished, leaving only a faint blur, barely distinguishable from the steam rising off the trains. It was enough to raise goosebumps up the archivist's arms. He leaned even closer toward the projection, almost drawn into the light. He watched the boy materialize again, his small outline cutting through the gray station air like a solitary thread. Once more those two old eyes locked on the lens. Once more, his lips moved. This time, though, something felt different. The archivist didn't know why, but he felt the word in his bones, vibrating through him even without sound. It felt like a warning or a plea, or perhaps a name long buried, long forgotten. He pressed his palms against the table to steady himself. The reel continued its relentless turning. Frame 24, frame 25, frame 26. And then, for the first time, the disappearance wasn't clean. The boy didn't vanish. Instead, his body twisted, as though pulled violently sideways by something outside the visible world. His satchel snapped across his chest. His eyes widened in terror, breaking their eerie calmness for the first time. His mouth opened, not in a whisper but in a scream the silent footage could not convey. A blur of darkness reached from the edge of the frame, enveloping him like a claw made of shadow and smoke. Then he was gone. The archivist stumbled backward, knocking over his chair, his breath strangled in his throat. He clutched his chest, staring at the frozen final frame where the boy once stood. The darkness at the edge of the image remained, even after the projector paused. A residual stain, a lingering presence. Something in that frame was still there, still watching from the other side of time. The reel spun loosely, its tail end slapping rhythmically against the empty reel. The sound echoed like a heartbeat out of sync. The archivist reached for the projector switch, but his hand hesitated. He felt a strange pull, a compulsion to watch it again, as if the film wanted him to, as if the boy needed him to. A gust of cold air swept across the room, extinguishing the lamp. Only the projector's beam remained, and the shadows clung even tighter. For a long moment, the archivist stood there, surrounded by darkness, the end of the reel flapping like a dying breath. And then he whispered to himself, in a trembling voice barely louder than the spinning projector, "This footage was never meant to be found. If you're here in this darkness with me, listening to this story unfold, do not forget to subscribe, so you can keep uncovering the truths buried beneath forgotten reels and lost wartime archives. Some stories should never be witnessed alone." The next morning, the archivist did not return to his office. His absence went unnoticed at first. The archive building was an enormous post-war labyrinth of forgotten collections, its rooms heavy with silence and dust. It was only after sunset that a night custodian noticed the faint glow still seeping through the door of the viewing room. The projector, somehow, was still running. The reel had long since spun itself out, flapping endlessly in the dark, like a flag surrendering to emptiness. When the custodian entered, he found the chair overturned and the lamp shattered on the floor. The reel remained on the table, its celluloid strip coiled neatly, as though someone had just finished watching it. There was no sign of the archivist. Only his glasses lay by the door, one lens cracked straight through. The air was cold enough to fog the custodian's breath. He switched off the projector, but even after the beam faded, a faint circle of light still pulsed on the wall for several seconds, a ghostly afterimage that refused to die. The official report described it as a temporary disappearance. They assumed the archivist had simply left without notice, perhaps overwhelmed by the isolation of his work. But the building's security cameras told a different story. At 1:14 a.m., motion sensors in the viewing room had triggered briefly. The footage showed the faint outline of a figure standing in front of the projector, though it wasn't clear whether it was the archivist. The figure's silhouette was too thin, too small, and just before the screen went to static, something strange occurred. The image of the boy, the same boy from the reel, appeared faintly on the wall, though the projector wasn't running any film at all. The next day, the reel was sealed inside an evidence container and transferred to the Bundesarchiv in Berlin. Its case was labeled with a warning, "Do not project." But warnings are rarely heeded for long. Months later, a young historian named Clara Weiss came across the record while cataloging materials for a wartime exhibition. She was meticulous, disciplined, the kind of researcher who thrived on details others overlooked. When she read the archivist's notes, she felt the pull immediately, a strange, irresistible curiosity that burned quietly at the back of her mind. She convinced herself it was professional interest, though deep down she knew it was more than that. There was something about the boy, the vanished child at the station, that unsettled her. It felt personal, even though she couldn't explain why. Clara was born decades after the war, but her family's history was steeped in its shadows. Her grandmother, Lotte, had been among the thousands evacuated from Stuttgart during the bombings. Lotte rarely spoke about those years, except once when Clara was a child. She had mentioned a friend, a quiet boy who used to wait with her at the station before the trains came. "He had strange eyes," her grandmother had whispered. "Too calm. He didn't belong in that time." When Clara asked what had happened to him, her grandmother had gone silent. Only once did she murmur something that still haunted Clara's memory. He disappeared before the train arrived, like smoke being pulled away. That memory returned now, sharp and electric, as she stared at the canister labeled Stuttgart Station, 1941. Clara told herself she would only examine the reel visually. She wouldn't project it, just inspect it for historical cataloging. She set up her desk in the small archive lab, switched on a magnifying viewer, and began to unspool the celluloid carefully. The frames glided past under the lens. Trains, smoke, soldiers, evacuees. And then she saw him, the boy, perfectly preserved between the brittle strips of film, frozen mid-step in a world that no longer existed. His eyes were clear even in miniature, hauntingly distinct, staring out from 1941 as if he were still aware of being watched. Clara's hand trembled slightly as she turned the reel. Then she froze. On the back of one of the frames, something no camera should have captured. Faint writing had appeared, etched directly into the film stock. It wasn't ink, but more like the emulsion itself had been burned with letters. The words were in German, but crude, uneven. Sieht dich immer. He always sees you. Clara exhaled sharply. Her chest tightened, and for a moment she felt the undeniable sensation that someone was standing just behind her shoulder. When she turned, the room was empty. That night she couldn't sleep. The reel sat on her desk, sealed in its canister again, but she could still feel it, as though it emitted a low hum beneath the floorboards. Around 2 a.m., she gave in to the temptation that had been gnawing at her since she first opened the box. She decided to project it. The old archive still had a functional 16mm projector in one of the viewing rooms. She set it up, dimmed the lights, and drew the curtains until the world outside vanished completely. As the reel began to turn, the mechanical whir filled the silence, steady and hypnotic. The light flickered onto the white wall, and once again the gray world of Stuttgart Station materialized from the void. The first frames were ordinary, almost comforting in their grainy texture. Then the boy appeared, exactly as described in the archivist's notes. The same dark coat, the same calm, unreadable eyes. Clara leaned closer. She wanted to see what he said, what the word had been. She mouthed the frames in slow motion, trying to decipher the movement of his lips. It looked like a name, 4 letters, maybe Eric or Elias. It was hard to tell. And then, without warning, the frame shuddered violently. The light dimmed, then surged brighter, flooding the room in blinding white. Clara shielded her eyes. When the image cleared, the boy was no longer standing on the platform. He was closer, much closer. His face now filled the entire projection. Pale, blurred slightly by motion, but unmistakably alive. The film was still running, but the frames had changed, as though someone had replaced them mid-reel. Clara's heart pounded. "That's not possible," she whispered. The boy's mouth moved again. This time the words were unmistakable. "Do you see me now?" Her breath caught in her throat. The air in the room grew dense, oppressive. The smell of burning celluloid filled her nostrils. She reached for the projector to stop it, but her fingers froze mid-air. The boy blinked once, a slow, deliberate motion, and in that instant, the projection on the wall changed. She was no longer seeing the station. She was seeing the viewing room itself, her own back, her own silhouette standing before the projector. Only, in the image, there was someone else behind her. Tall, featureless, wrapped in darkness like the absence of light. Clara turned. Nothing, just the low hum of the machine. But when she looked back at the projection, the figure was closer now, right behind her image on the screen. Its arm rose slowly, reaching toward her shoulder. She hit the power switch. The reel stopped with a harsh metallic click. The lights flickered back on. The air felt like ice. She stood there, trembling, staring at the silent projector. The film strip had melted slightly near the end, fusing 2 frames together. Her heart still raced, the echo of her pulse loud in her ears. When she examined the fused section later, she found something else. Between the melted edges, burned into the emulsion, was a new image that hadn't existed before. A photograph of the viewing room taken from a high angle, showing her, frozen mid-turn, her face blurred in motion, and behind her, the faint silhouette of the boy. She dropped the film and stumbled back, her breath short and ragged. The image had not just recorded her. It had added her, as if the reel continued to grow, capturing whoever dared to watch it. Clara sealed the reel in its canister, locked it inside a metal drawer, and left the archive without looking back. That night, she called her grandmother. The old woman's voice was frail, trembling. "You found it, didn't you?" Lotta said before Clara could even speak. "The film." Clara's hand tightened around the phone. "How do you know about it?" A long pause, then softly, "Because I was there. I saw him. The boy." The silence that followed stretched endlessly, broken only by the faint hum of the line. Then her grandmother whispered, "He wasn't supposed to exist." Before Clara could ask anything more, the line went dead. She sat in the dark for hours, staring at the phone, feeling the coldness creeping back into the room. When she finally dared to look toward her desk, she noticed something that made her stomach drop. The reel's canister, the one she had locked away, was sitting open. The film, coiled loosely on the floor, glistened faintly in the dim light. A single frame, faced upward, catching the glow from the street lamp outside. It showed a room, her room, and at its center, a woman sitting perfectly still, holding a telephone. And behind her, near the window, stood a small boy in a dark coat, his face half hidden in shadow. The next morning, Clara did not report to the archive. If you're still watching, still here beneath the low hum of this story, remember to keep the light on, and maybe, just maybe, subscribe. Because what comes next was never meant to be found by anyone still breathing. The reel's official history was impossible to trace. The Bundesarchiv listed it as an unverified acquisition from a private collection in 1987, yet no donor name appeared in the ledger. The canister's surface bore an embossed factory mark belonging to Agfa Wolfen, a German company that had produced film stock during the war for both propaganda and surveillance. But there was one detail that didn't fit. The emulsion formula coded into the reel's edge, type A, hadn't been developed until the late 1950s. It was as if the film existed between decades, belonging to neither the war nor the peace that followed it. A ghost, trapped in its own chronology. After Clara's disappearance, the authorities again sealed the canister, labeling it Restricted Material, Ocular Hazard. It was transferred to a secure cold storage vault beneath the archive, accessible only by 2 senior conservators. For a while, the reel slept in its metallic coffin, surrounded by the hum of refrigeration units and the slow drip of condensation. But the archive itself was an old building, and old buildings never truly keep secrets. There was always someone willing to open forbidden boxes. That someone was a graduate researcher named Lucas Reiter. Lucas had been fascinated by unsolved wartime artifacts since childhood. He'd grown up in Ulm, surrounded by ruins and rumors, stories of burned photographs, missing trains, and unregistered evacuees. He had heard the legend of the boy from Stuttgart, whispered among historians who traded ghost stories after too many hours in the stacks. When he learned that the reel actually existed, locked away beneath the Bundesarchiv, he knew he had to see it for himself. He believed in facts, not phantoms. But every legend begins with a detail too strange to ignore. He gained access under the pretense of digitization, signing forms that warned of radiation exposure, fungal contamination, even psychological discomfort. He laughed at the wording, assuming it was bureaucratic exaggeration. He wore gloves, followed procedure, and unsealed the canister beneath sterile light. At first it looked unremarkable, just a reel of film coiled tight, its edges shimmering faintly. But as he turned it under the light, he noticed something moving within the emulsion itself. Tiny specks, like dust or static, that shifted when the angle changed. He blinked, adjusted his glasses, and leaned closer. The specks rearranged into faint shapes, outlines of people, faces blurred as though submerged in deep water. When he lifted the reel away, the shapes dissolved. He told himself it was an optical illusion. That night, however, Lucas dreamed of the station. He had never seen Stuttgart Central in person, yet he recognized it instantly. The arching steel canopy, the haze of coal smoke, the endless sound of departures. In the dream, he stood on the platform, clutching the reel in his hands. People brushed past him without acknowledgement, their faces strangely indistinct. Only one figure looked directly at him, a small boy in a dark coat. "You shouldn't have opened it," the boy said. His voice was clear, though his lips didn't move. "He's still waiting." Lucas woke, gasping, the echo of a train whistle fading in his ears. The reel sat on his desk, exactly where he'd left it. Yet the canister lid had shifted half an inch open. Over the following days, Lucas grew obsessed. He began cross-referencing wartime newsreels, searching for any mention of a child vanishing at Stuttgart Station in 1941. Nothing. No police record, no missing persons report. Not even a rumor preserved in the city archives. But he found something else, something buried within a batch of Nazi propaganda films labeled Reichsbahnhof Stuttgart, inspection footage. The reel was credited to an SS film division known as Abteilung für Beobachtung 7, or Observation Unit 7. The division's purpose was vague, but Lucas found one chilling note in an attached memo, test of chrono-optic recording, March 1941. Subject, child volunteer, E. Chrono-optic. The term didn't appear in any other documents of the period. Lucas dug deeper, tracing it through university archives and scientific correspondence. Eventually, he found a name. Professor Otto Weidemann, a physicist attached to the Reichsahnennerbe, the SS's archaeological and occult research branch. Weidemann had written extensively about temporal resonance in light exposure, the idea that certain wavelengths of light could capture more than the visible spectrum, potentially recording imprints of time itself. His experiments were shut down in 1942 after several assistants reportedly went missing during projection testing. Lucas felt his stomach tighten. He knew, without admitting it aloud, that the film he held was one of those experiments. The boy wasn't just filmed. He had been recorded in a way that transcended normal footage, turned into something beyond life and death. And the observation didn't end in 1941. He replayed Clara's last voicemail dozens of times. Her voice trembled under static. "He's in the light, Lucas. Don't let him look at you." Then nothing but silence, followed by the faint sound of a train pulling away. Lucas's hands shook as he wrote his report. He should have turned the reel in immediately, sealed it back under lock. But he couldn't stop thinking about the boy's face, the way his eyes had seemed aware. What if somehow the child had been trapped there, in the film? What if this was his only way out? At 11:48 p.m., Lucas loaded the reel into the digital scanner. He told himself it was only for documentation. The whir of the machine filled the silence. Line by line, the boy's face began to reappear on the monitor, grainy, flickering, impossibly real. The scanner hummed, translating light into data, frame into pixels. Then halfway through the scan, the system froze. The monitor flickered once, twice, then replaced the transfer interface with live footage, grainy, black and white, showing the very room Lucas sat in. His own back, hunched over the desk. The camera angle didn't exist. It came from nowhere. Yet there it was, streaming in monochrome from the depths of the file. He spun in his chair. No one, just the faint hum of the machine. When he turned back, the screen had changed again. The boy was standing behind him, perfectly still. Lucas lunged for the power cable, yanking it free. The monitor went black, the scanner silent. For a few seconds, there was only the thudding of his heart. Then he noticed the faint glow still leaking from the scanner tray. The film itself was emitting light, soft, flickering, rhythmic, like the pulse of a living thing. He lifted the lid slowly. Inside, burned into the last few frames, was his own face, mouth open mid-breath, eyes wide, the reflection of something dark behind him, reaching forward. He dropped the lid, stumbled back, and fled the room. The door slammed behind him, plunging the archive into total darkness. By morning, the reel was gone. Weeks later, a janitor found the canister sitting on a train bench in Stuttgart Central Station. It had no label now, no markings at all, only the faint imprint of fingerprints on the lid. The station's security footage revealed nothing. One moment the bench was empty, the next, the canister was there. The reel was returned once more to the archive, though no one claimed responsibility. It was placed in a new containment vault, along with a note handwritten by an anonymous curator. Every time it is watched, it adds another. The note was unsigned, but beneath the last sentence was a faint smudge that, under light, revealed the partial impression of a small hand. For years, rumors spread among archivists. They said sometimes, late at night, the viewing rooms would flicker with brief flashes of light, like an unseen projector starting and stopping. They said that if you listened closely, you could hear a faint child's voice whispering from the vents, repeating a single phrase in German. Sieht dich immer. He always sees you. Some tried to dismiss it as hysteria, the echo of too many long nights surrounded by ghosts of the past. But others knew better. They said the boy was still there, waiting for someone to look long enough, for someone to give him shape again in the beam of light. They said that each time the reel was projected, the room grew colder and shadows lengthened toward the screen. They said that somewhere between the frames, between the fractions of seconds where motion becomes memory, something looks back. If you've stayed with the story until now, if you've felt the hum in your own room, remember, don't look too long into the flicker. But if you do, at least subscribe, so you'll know what happens when the light comes back on. The last recorded mention of Abteilung für Beobachtung 7 appeared in a classified memorandum dated April 1942, discovered decades later in a damp warehouse outside Leipzig. The document was short, typed in uneven ink on yellowed paper, stamped with the insignia of the unravel, an organization that blurred the line between archaeology, mysticism, and scientific obsession. The memo read simply, "The boy has been stabilized in light. Proceed with temporal calibration." No signature, no further explanation. To most historians, it was another fragment from a sea of bureaucratic madness that characterized the dying machinery of the Third Reich. But for those who studied the forbidden corners of wartime experimentation, the memo was a keyhole into something darker, a realm where physics met the occult, and where the Nazi pursuit of control extended beyond death itself. Professor Otto Weidemann's laboratory had been buried for decades beneath the rubble of Stuttgart University, its remains sealed after Allied bombings in 1945. In 1997, construction workers unearthed a collapsed sub-basement filled with corroded equipment, warped camera housings, and boxes of undeveloped film reels melted together by heat. Among the debris, one metal plate still bore a legible inscription etched into its rusted surface: Project Morgenlicht, Project Morning Light. Inside a locked drawer, protected by layers of wax paper, investigators found a small, handwritten journal belonging to Weidemann. The ink had bled into the paper, the pages warped with time, but several entries remained intact. They told a story that read like a fever dream. March 6th, 1941. Subject E was chosen for his composure. The boy does not cry. He follows instruction perfectly, though he seems aware of the light's hunger. March 9th, 1941. The resonance patterns increase when the station's locomotives pass. Perhaps the sound, or the vibration, links time across itself. He remains calm, even when the frame begins to shimmer. His eyes absorb more light than they should. March 14th, 1941. We are no longer recording him. He is recording us. That last entry ended abruptly, followed by a jagged ink smear and a single word written in the margin: Verloren, lost. The discovery reignited interest in the Stuttgart reel. Journalists speculated, conspiracists theorized, and occult researchers proclaimed that the film was Weidemann's final test, the moment when Subject E became more than human, or less. The boy in the footage, they claimed, was Elias Bauer, a local orphan enrolled in a state-run relocation program in 1941. Records confirmed that Elias had boarded a train to Munich but never arrived. His name disappeared from all transport lists shortly after March 15th. One surviving photograph from his school, discovered in a municipal archive, showed a pale, solemn child standing among classmates. But the longer one looked at the photo, the stranger it became. The edges around Elias's figure appeared faintly distorted, as though the negative had warped only where he stood. His outline didn't quite belong to the same layer of reality as the others. The journalist who found the photograph, Miriam Adler, described feeling a vibration through the fingertips when she held it. Within a week of publishing her article, she vanished from her Berlin apartment. The lights had been left on. On her wall above her desk, police found a single sheet of film pinned like a photograph. It was blank, except for the faint outline of a small boy standing in a doorway. By the early 2000s, the Stuttgart reel had become an underground myth. Bootleg copies circulated on the dark web under names like The Vanishing Child Footage and The Experiment of Light. But none of these versions were authentic. They were recreations, attempts to imitate the eerie descriptions passed between archivists and eyewitnesses. Yet curiously, many who watched these fakes reported the same phenomena: the flicker of motion in the corners of their rooms, the whisper of a train whistle echoing from nowhere, the soft murmur of a child's voice repeating a question that no one could understand. Even counterfeit light, it seemed, could carry the residue of the real thing. In 2016, a private collector named Heinrich Voss claimed to have purchased the original reel through an anonymous auction in Prague. A reclusive historian with a passion for occult artifacts, Voss lived alone in a manor on the outskirts of Lake Constance. He was known for his eccentric collection of forbidden films, supposed Nazi propaganda reels that never made it to public view, rumored to contain metaphysical anomalies. When asked by reporters about the Stuttgart film, he laughed. "People fear shadows," he said, "but shadows are only proof that something stands in the light." A year later, his manor burned to the ground. The fire department found the building's interior coated in a thin layer of soot and melted film residue. No human remains were ever confirmed. Only a pile of scorched camera lenses fused into a single black mass. In the basement, investigators found a metal canister that had survived the flames, still sealed. Inside, the film was intact, but something had changed. The frames were blank, every single one. At first, archivists believed the emulsion had been destroyed by heat, but when the strip was placed under spectral light for restoration, faint shadows began to emerge. They weren't scenes, just movement, fluid and uncertain, like shapes pressing from beneath the surface. Then came a clearer image, a reflection of the lab itself, though captured from an impossible angle, as if the camera had been placed behind the viewer. And in that reflection, near the edge of the frame, a small figure could be seen walking toward the light. Historians refused to handle the film afterward. Some said it was cursed. Others said it was sentient. The term ocular contagion began to circulate among restoration circles, a theory suggesting that the human mind, when exposed to the film's temporal resonance, could act as a projector, continuing the experiment inside the viewer's perception. In other words, the boy didn't just appear on the film, he appeared through it, using sight as the gateway between time and flesh. In 2019, a British documentary crew attempted to produce a feature on the Stuttgart case. They secured permission to film in the Bundesarchiv's basement, where the surviving remnants of Project Morning Light were stored. The footage from that night was never aired publicly. However, leaked fragments later surfaced online, showing the team entering the vault at 22:37 hours. Their last recorded shot displayed the projector flickering to life. The boy appeared briefly, half-formed, grain dissolving into clarity, and then the camera feed cut to static. When emergency responders arrived 2 days later, they found the crew's cameras still recording. The room was empty except for the equipment, and in the center of the floor, burned into the concrete, was a faint circular mark exactly the size of the projector's beam. For months afterward, technicians reported strange distortions while reviewing unrelated footage in the same facility, random frames of the Stuttgart station appearing inside other films, embedded like parasites. A security video of an elevator showed a passing shadow that wasn't there seconds earlier. A microfilm scan of census records revealed the face of a child among the text, blinking once before vanishing. Whatever Weidemann had captured in 1941, it was no longer confined to its reel. By 2022, the German government quietly classified the Stuttgart material under a new directive, Kryptische Archivdokument 741D. Access was restricted, references scrubbed from public databases. But digital fragments still existed, scans, frame captures, data packets that slipped through during the brief period of digitization. They traveled the internet like spores, impossible to trace, impossible to destroy. And somewhere among those fragments, deep within a forgotten server in Prague, a 32-second clip began to autoplay at random intervals. It showed the Stuttgart platform, restored perfectly in black and white. The trains exhaled smoke. The passengers hurried past, and in the center of the frame, a boy turned toward the camera. His lips moved, the same as before, only this time the words were clear, the English unmistakable. "Are you watching this alone?" For those who saw it, the clip could not be paused or closed. The image would linger even after the screen went dark, faint and inverted, burned into the viewer's retinas like a flash from an old camera. Some said they could still see him in mirrors, in windows, even in the reflection of their own eyes. The boy from Stuttgart had become a digital ghost, a living echo of Weidemann's experiment, carried forward by light once again. They say the human brain processes moving images at 24 frames per second. But between those frames, between each blink of perception, there is darkness. And in that darkness, something waits, patient, watching back through time. If the flicker feels too close, if the hum in your speakers sounds like breathing, take a breath yourself, steady your hands, and maybe subscribe. It's the only way to keep the lights on when the reel starts turning again. They said the boy had found a new way to travel, not through trains anymore, but through light itself. In the years after the government sealed the Stuttgart materials, rumors began to spread among archivists, projectionists, and film restorers, flickers of strange footage appearing during restorations, brief frames that didn't belong, strange childlike figures seen at the edges of the light. At first, these were dismissed as coincidence or digital corruption, but then, one by one, people began to vanish again. All of them connected to the real, all of them last seen near screens, monitors, or projectors that had begun to hum just a little louder than usual. It began with Lucas's assistant, a young technician named Anja Müller. She had been the last person to scan the digitized fragments of the reel, cataloging the visual noise patterns for restoration. One night, while working alone in the lab, she sent a message to a colleague. "The boy is in the static again. I think he's trying to speak." That message was sent at 2:14 a.m. By 2:17 a.m., the lab's surveillance cameras cut to white noise. When security entered 20 minutes later, they found her workstation still on, the monitor replaying a frozen image. The Stuttgart platform, empty, except for a small boy standing in the middle, facing the lens. No body was found, only the faint smell of ozone and the sound of something metallic spinning slowly on the floor. The empty spool of a reel. The disappearance triggered a full investigation by the German Federal Archives, but the deeper they looked, the more unstable the records became. Entire database entries vanished overnight, file names replaced with unreadable symbols. Copies of Weidemann's notes turned to blank pages when printed. Even the official photographs of the film canister began to degrade digitally, the boy's face appearing faintly in the negative space between light and shadow. Experts tried to explain it as bit rot, corruption, electromagnetic interference, but those who had seen the real footage whispered something else, that the reel was alive in some way, not as a spirit, but as a circuit between time and the living, forever searching for an audience. The more it was watched, the stronger it became. Somewhere in that growing digital darkness, the boy was still staring out. In January 2023, an independent filmmaker named Daniel Hurst stumbled upon a leaked copy of the Stuttgart footage on an encrypted archive board. The file was labeled Stuttgart one move and contained 37 seconds of grainy black and white film. Daniel had spent years documenting unsolved wartime mysteries for a small online channel. His viewers loved conspiracies, ghost reels, and stories of lost archives. He downloaded the file without hesitation. At first, it seemed harmless, flickering imagery of the old station, faint static over the soundless film. But then, midway through, the screen began to distort. The platform darkened, the crowd thinned, and the boy appeared, just as described in every legend. His coat, his satchel, his motionless stare. Only this time Daniel swore the boy's head turned after the frame should have ended, following him as he moved around the room. He closed the laptop, heart hammering. The screen went black, but in the reflection of the glossy surface he still saw movement, the faint outline of a child standing in the doorway behind him. When he turned, there was nothing there. Over the next few days, Daniel's channel exploded with new subscribers. He hadn't even posted the clip, yet somehow it had appeared online under his account, auto-uploaded at 3:03 a.m. The video title, "The Boy Who Sees Through Time." Viewers reported strange experiences, the sound of trains in the background, the image flickering differently depending on where they watched it. A few claimed that at exactly 24 seconds in, the boy blinked. Others said the reflection in his eyes showed their own rooms. Within a week, the video had been deleted by the platform, flagged for unidentified content anomalies. Daniel disappeared the following day. When authorities entered his apartment, they found the walls covered with printed screenshots of the video. Hundreds of still frames arranged in chronological order, each with handwritten timestamps. In the final frame, at the very bottom of the wall, Daniel had written a single sentence in red ink. He watches the watchers. The Stuttgart reel had crossed the threshold. It no longer needed to be found. It found you. Researchers began reporting disturbances in data storage linked to the file's metadata. Servers in Berlin, Prague, and Oslo experienced synchronized system failures, each accompanied by corrupted footage of the same 1941 station. The timestamps were identical, the distortions matching frame by frame. It was as though the reel was reconstructing itself through the global network, piece by piece, searching for completion. One cybersecurity expert, Dr. Elise Wren, described it best in her field report. "We are witnessing an infection of light. The footage behaves like a living organism using human curiosity as its host." She was later hospitalized after collapsing during a lecture mid-sentence. Witnesses said the projector behind her had started running without input, displaying a single frozen frame. The boy's face magnified to fill the wall. When staff shut it off, the bulb exploded, scattering shards across the room. The footage, recorded by students, was confiscated by authorities, but clips leaked anyway. In a cold storage unit near Munich, a retired projectionist named Hans Keller claimed to have kept the original reel hidden for decades. He said he had been a young man working for the Bundesarchiv in the 1960s when the canister was first delivered. "They told us not to run it," he said in an interview, "but someone always does." He described seeing the boy in his dreams afterward, standing beside a train that never arrived, holding something wrapped in cloth. When Hans woke, his sheets were cold to the touch, as though someone else had just left the bed. He refused to say where the reel was now, only that it never stayed still for long. When pressed about what he thought the boy wanted, Hans gave a strange answer. He doesn't want to be seen. He wants you to remember him seeing you. A month after the interview, Hans was found dead in his home, television still on, showing static. His final recorded voicemail contained 6 seconds of silence, followed by the faint whistle of a departing train. By the late 20s, the Stuttgart footage had become a cultural ghost. It appeared in fleeting fragments, A second of interference on a live broadcast, a blurry child visible in reflections during news footage, even rumors of cinema screens flickering with the boy's face just before power outages. No single copy existed anymore. The reel had dispersed into light itself, into every medium that carried image or memory. Some theorized that the original film was only a vessel, that Weidemann's experiment had fractured reality at the moment of recording, turning every lens, every camera, every screen into a potential doorway. But there were still those who sought it. Collectors, cultists, believers. They called themselves the Order of the Frame, a secretive group devoted to preserving the eternal witness. Their forums were filled with instructions on summoning the real through synchronized projections, using overlapping frequencies of old film projectors and modern screens. They claimed that if played in total darkness, at exactly 2:41 a.m., the boy would appear between frames, and through him one could glimpse the moment before time breaks. No one who performed the ritual was ever heard from again. Police raids on their hideouts revealed strange setups. Rooms lined with mirrors, endless loops of film running across multiple projectors, their bulbs burnt out, but still humming faintly. In one case, a half-burned piece of film was recovered, showing a clear image of a police officer entering the room, frozen mid-step. The negative ended before the next frame. There were no records of that officer ever existing, and yet, despite all of it, people kept searching for the real. It was as if human nature itself couldn't resist the gravity of the unknown, the allure of forbidden light. Journalists, historians, content creators, all drawn like moths to the same flickering source. They said those who stared too long into the boy's eyes would start to see flashes of the station in everyday reflections. The glint of steel rails in puddles, the blur of smoke in passing headlights, the distant echo of wheels on tracks where no train ran anymore. The line between history and haunting had collapsed, and in that collapse, the boy was free. Some say that on certain nights, if you walk through Stuttgart Central at 3 a.m., you can still hear it. The faint click of an old film reel spinning somewhere beneath the hum of the modern city. A rhythmic pulse, almost like breathing. The security cameras sometimes flicker at that exact moment, and in the playback, a small boy can be seen standing at the far end of the platform, staring directly into the lens. No one knows where he goes after that. If you've stayed with this story until now, keep the lights on. The reel feeds on shadow, and every view brings it closer to the world it left behind. But if you dare to watch further, if you want to know what happens when the past finally finishes playing itself, then stay, because the last reel, the final sequence, was never meant to exist. It's waiting for you in the dark. So before the light flickers again, subscribe, not for me, but for the ones who still watch between the frames. The night the reel played for the last time began like any other winter evening, cold, metallic, indifferent. Stuttgart's air hung heavy with fog, the same colorless mist that once cloaked the trains of 1941. The new station, rebuilt and modernized, gleamed under artificial light, yet somewhere beneath its concrete foundations, the ruins of the old platforms still lingered, like the memory of a wound. Few people knew that directly under Track 7 lay the remnants of Weidemann's laboratory, buried and sealed after the war, a tomb of steel and silence. That was where the documentary crew found it. They were not professionals, just 3 urban explorers chasing a legend. Their leader, a man named Jonas Richter, had grown up hearing the story of the vanishing boy. His grandfather had been stationed in Stuttgart during the war and had once mentioned the experiment in the tunnels before dementia stole his memories completely. Jonas spent years chasing fragments, government reports, damaged reels, forgotten case files. Eventually, he located the coordinates of the sealed chamber beneath the old station. They broke in through an access tunnel at midnight. The camera recorded everything. Their breath misting in the cold air, the crunch of rubble beneath their boots. The deeper they went, the less their flashlights seemed to matter. The darkness swallowed everything. At last, they reached a corroded metal door bearing the faded words, Project Morgenlicht. Jonas touched the handle. It was warm. Inside lay a small room no larger than a chapel, its walls covered in film reels, all fused together by age and heat. In the center stood a single projector, its brass frame dulled by time, but otherwise untouched. A spool of film still threaded through its gears, as though waiting for someone to finish what had been started. Jonas set up his camera. "This is it," he whispered. "The original site." His friend Amélie circled the projector, her flashlight trembling. "Jonas, look." On the floor beneath the machine lay the faint outline of a small pair of footprints, preserved in dust. The third member, Lucas, named after the researcher who vanished years earlier, lifted the reel carefully. It was labeled with a single number, 041. He hesitated, then said, "You realize what happens if this is real, right?" Jonas smiled, though his voice cracked when he spoke. "Then we finally see him." They threaded the reel. The projector coughed to life, its light spilling onto the cracked concrete wall. For a moment, nothing, just static, a storm of dust and scratches. Then slowly, the image sharpened. The Stuttgart station appeared. Not the modern one, the old one, gray and crowded, as if time itself had folded. The trains hissed steam, passengers hurried past, and through the noise of history, the boy emerged once more. He was exactly as every witness had described, still calm, eyes too knowing for his age. The explorers stood frozen, mouths open, the beam flickering across their faces. The camera recorded their trembling silhouettes, their shadows merging with his on the wall. The boy turned his head toward them. "Do you see me?" he whispered. Jonas stumbled backward. Did you hear that?" "It's impossible," Amélie breathed. "The film has no audio." But the boy's lips kept moving. He stepped closer, the film grain dissolving as though he were walking out of it, approaching through decades. His face filled the wall, the edges of the frame warping violently. The projector began to shake. "Turn it off!" Lucas shouted. Jonas hesitated. "No, just one more second." The light burst white. The camera fell, skidding across the floor. The footage ended there. The next morning, the Stuttgart power grid suffered a 2-minute blackout. When authorities investigated the tunnels, they found the projector still running, its bulb burned out, the reel spinning endlessly. There was no sign of Jonas, Amélie, or Lucas. Only the camera remained, its final frame frozen on the boy's face, closer than any frame before. His eyes were no longer calm. They were open wide, reflecting the room in perfect clarity. In those reflections stood 3 blurred figures, staring into the light. The footage was confiscated immediately, but fragments leaked, as they always do. Clips began appearing on encrypted channels, each slightly different. In one, the boy whispered a word that no one could quite make out. In another, the image was reversed, the station receding instead of approaching. And in one version, one that appeared for only a few hours before deletion. The boy, he smiled. Not a gentle smile, but something ancient and triumphant, as if he had finally crossed whatever barrier had held him captive for 80 years. Experts who analyzed the leaks noted a chilling detail. In the background of the projection room, barely visible between frames, there was a fourth silhouette. A man watching from the doorway. No one could identify him. His face never appeared. Weeks passed, and then something stranger happened. Across Europe, railway stations began experiencing power failures at exactly 3:17 a.m. The same timestamp found in the Explorer's footage. Security cameras caught flickers of static just before the outages, each containing a single frame of the boy standing motionless between trains. In some images, he was facing the camera. In others, he was turned away, as though waiting for someone. One witness, a janitor working at Munich Central, reported seeing a child made of light walking along the platform before fading into the tracks. His voice on the police recording trembled as he described it. He looked right at me, like he knew me. 2 days later, the janitor's body was found near the rails, eyes burned white, as if exposed to a camera flash that never ended. Meanwhile, researchers discovered something hidden deep within the metadata of the Stuttgart footage. Lines of code that didn't belong to any known editing software. When converted to text, the code spelled a single sentence repeated endlessly. I remember every eye that saw me. That message appeared in every surviving copy, regardless of source or file type. Even blank storage drives, once connected to infected systems, began producing the same message in their data logs. Some theorists called it an echo, a digital imprint of human consciousness carried forward by light. Others called it what it truly was, possession. By then it was too late to contain it. The boy was everywhere. Across the internet, strange videos began to appear. A news broadcast in Warsaw briefly showed the Stuttgart station in its closing seconds. A live stream from London flickered with the boy's reflection for a single frame. Viewers reported sudden nosebleeds, migraines, and night terrors after watching. A few claimed that during power outages, their computer screens glowed faintly with an image of the old station, though no electricity remained. Governments quietly removed the clips. Servers were shut down. But erasing light is impossible. Every deletion leaves a shadow. In March 2025, a global blackout lasted 13 seconds. The cause was never officially disclosed, but during those 13 seconds, every active screen, from smartphones to digital billboards, displayed a single monochrome image. A child standing at the edge of a platform, looking into the camera, and behind him, a train with no number, doors open, waiting. After the power returned, millions of people reported hearing a faint voice through their speakers, not in words, but in breath. A single exhale, as though someone had just stepped into their rooms. They called it the moment of return. The reel had finally finished playing. In the years since, stories still circulate. Some say the boy never left, that he is the last witness of time, the reflection of all who have watched and disappeared. They say he walks through every lens, every light, every flickering screen, seeking those who remember his name. Others whisper that he was never a victim at all, that Weidemann's experiment didn't trap him, but released something wearing his shape. Whichever truth you believe, the result is the same. He has learned to live in the gaze. The act of looking sustains him. Every view is an invitation, every reflection a doorway. Some researchers still try to study the phenomenon, though none last long. One, a psychologist from Vienna, wrote in her final note before vanishing, "We created him by watching. We built him from the hunger between frames. He exists because we cannot look away." Tonight, the last known copy of the reel sits in a climate-controlled vault somewhere in Geneva, locked behind biometric security. Yet even there, the cameras sometimes flicker. The guards report hearing the faint rattle of a film projector echoing from the ventilation ducts. The light comes and goes, and sometimes, on their monitors, a frame appears that shouldn't exist. A boy waiting at a platform that no longer stands, smiling faintly at whoever happens to look. The file name changes each time, but the timestamp always reads 3:17. That's when the reel turns itself on. If you've reached this point, you've already looked too long. The boy sees you now. He'll remember the shape of your eyes, the pattern of light in your room, the silence between your breaths. But if you want to keep him in the story, to keep him inside the frame instead of outside it, then stay with the light. Keep the screen glowing. Let the reel spin a little longer, because as long as someone is watching, he doesn't need to come closer. So before you go, before the darkness between frames widens, leave a like so the light doesn't die. Subscribe so the reel keeps turning, and comment. Tell us where you're watching from before the screen goes black. The reel remembers, and so does he.